Okay, this really is bothering me. Um, the glare.
Hmm.
Okay. I don't know. I don't know.
Is there
I'm
any
being,
way you can like reduce brightness on your screen or
yeah, maybe. Um, I usually always have it at full brightness, but it's just in a certain position that it looks like, I don't know. I don't know. It was like not doing this yesterday. So I don't know how I had it before where it wasn't being annoying, but
Hmm.
we will survive. Okay. So I'll be starting this now. All right. What's up, funky people? Laura, Funk God here. Another episode of Funky Psyche, where independent thinkers come to chat about funky stuff. So today I'm here with my friend Casey Miller. Casey,
Hi.
hello. Casey is a young detransitioner, and she kind of came on the scene maybe about 7 months ago. And since she's had a very interesting journey of, identity, discovery, growth, healing, as well as, having experiences being public. But as I want to do on Funky Psyche, I want to excavate and explore more holistically about the guest. And there's far more to Casey than medical issues or whatever the public projects. So that's what I want to talk to her about. Um, so I'll just talk a little bit about how we know each other. We both have medical stuff. So that's kind of how that is. But we've kind of got to know each other mostly through Twitter spaces. Kind of just detrans. I think you were hosting a detrans and chill space months ago, and I hadn't been in a lot of spaces. But then when I went into that one, I was like, maybe I should host some of my own. Like maybe that should be a way to socialize where I don't really have to like go out and meet people and stuff. So that's how I started doing more spaces. And so we've been in several spaces together. And um yeah. So I did have a list of things. We will probably be jumping around, but I'll start off. How are you doing today? Is there anything particularly that's come up? I know you recently posted another car update video, which is
Those
very
damn
nice.
car videos.
No, it's extremely authentic. It's like the American dream. So I don't know if you want to just say like what is your headspace, after posting that, and it seems like it's been a pretty positive space. Is that fair?
Yeah, so I actually the past couple of weeks I had been thinking that I wanted to film some sort of update video because I noticed around late April that I had like this shift in mentality where I kind of entered like a place of radical acceptance and I've really been on the upswing since then. Like I've made a surprising amount of growth and progress in myself and even experienced a little bit of healing. And of course, last time everybody knew me on the internet was like that video that went viral in October where I looked like I was going to cry. And I think I probably was going to cry. And like all of my meltdowns on my old Twitter account, it's just like lamenting my life and thinking that everything was ruined and that I was too far gone. So I'm like, hey, maybe I should update these people because I'm actually doing really good. And then I had a conversation with somebody yesterday over the phone. It was a really good conversation, had to do with detrans stuff. And I was like really on that day. Like my brain was with it. I felt like I could dictate words well. And I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to put the phone up. I'm going to shoot a video, see how it goes. And I did. And then I was looking back at it and kind of editing it. um, and I was like, yeah, this is the message I want to get across is that we can heal and we can move on and that we're more resilient than we realize. Cause I think that's one big thing that even though I've taken a step back from things, I've had a problem with is everybody portraying detransitioners and everybody that medically transitions is doomed and ruined. And,
Yeah.
trying to um, convey that this is a very serious thing. People shouldn't be doing what we have gone through, or people shouldn't do what we've done. But at the same time, we can still build meaningful lives and move on. So I made that video and I put it out, and I've actually been in like a really good headspace. I just uploaded that video to YouTube because I do have a YouTube channel from when I like posted before. And the thing that keeps me like I'm doing really good because the thing that keeps me going, I got two detransitioners in the comments that were like, you don't know how like thankful I am
Mm,
to see somebody like me talking about
wow.
this.
That's really important.
That's why I'm doing this. That's why I'm coming back because I feel like we need positive representation,
Mm-hmm.
showing growth and healing and evolution over time.
Yeah, I mean, that is what I got the sense from that video. And from what I've seen, I mean, obviously, I'm a little biased in what the algorithm shows me in terms of comments that are coming up or whatever about it have been exclusively very positive. Have you received, I know before you received very high profile attention, negative attention from trans influencers, and I'm guessing that they don't have as much to say about this one.
So far, I have not seen a peep out of them. I forget. The video is done pretty well so far. I occasionally I'll look through the comments and I look through who like retweeted it and stuff. There's like some people that have retweeted it, but it hasn't really hit like conservative social media like it did
Mm,
before, because like the first video of course got retweeted by everybody, and they accused me of being like a Republican psyop because I was following Matt Walsh and all of those people on that account, which I'm not on this one.
mm,
It's received a lot of traffic, but I haven't even gotten like any like negative, well-meaning comments like, oh, you poor thing, like you look so masculinized or too far gone. I haven't gotten too much of
mm.
that. Even like, but nothing from the TRAs. And I posted in my Twitter circle, I was like kind of nervous about it, but I'm like, actually, if the TRAs go for this one over the first one that I posted, then that just shows how low they go. So I'm
Yeah.
like, you know what? We'll see if they bite. If they bite, then that's just like complete rock bottom, because this
Mm.
video is like more wholesome and more well intentioned than the last one.
I mean, it's I'm so obsessed with like stories like how it like evolution. That's like and just seeing your evolution just the book ended. I mean, I know, and even there's so much more that I don't know, but just from what I've been, following of your tweets and your Twitter circle stuff and everything, like, but just to bookend it with the only sort of representation of your experience that first video, and then this one 7 months later, I just like the synchronicities and like just the growth is so evident. I think I agree. It would be a pretty bad look for them, the TRAs, if they said comments. I mean, it was a bad look for them to begin with because you weren't even saying anything bad or derogatory about trans or anything.
No,
Um, but I get it. I mean, the first video, Matt Walsh featured on his show, which is pretty intense for someone's like video that was just meant to be like a small, chill sort of car video. How did you feel about that? Because that alone is really intense.
honestly, it scared me because I knew a little bit about politics, but and like how social media worked and kind of what the um what's the right word? I knew kind of the gravity of the situation of a clip like mine ending up on a show like his and seeing it get hundreds of thousands of views. Honestly, at the time, I was dissociating. I was completely dissociating. I don't have much like of a specific memory from that point in time just because of the sheer bombardment that I was getting, and also like grappling with my own decisions and being like, hey, is this something I actually do fully regret? And then like, the grief hitting me and all of that stuff. But I do remember seeing it completely blow up, seeing everybody retweet it. And when it got on Matt Walsh's show, and like, I started getting the email interview requests, that's when I started getting really scared because I'm like, this is actually turning into something which I never intended for it to. I had no idea how Twitter worked. It was like, wow, I was a week on Twitter. It was ridiculous. The,
Okay.
the amount of time that I was on, I had no idea how social media worked. Um,
No, that algorithm,
yeah,
there's specific algorithms it will just take off. Like something about detransition, especially if it is a sympathetic story. Like I don't even want to call it trauma porn because though it may be trauma porn to people who view it that way, that wasn't your intention for the content. But it was a kind of objectively sympathetic. I mean, you were being sympathetic in it as well. You were being sympathetic to other people, telling, informing them of effects. So it already had an objectively sympathetic tone, and anything sympathetic at all, even in a neutral, nuanced way, will be hijacked by the algorithm, which you couldn't, you wouldn't know until you've been on, and then it's just like, okay. And then you kind of know how it's going to happen after that. Um, but I have to say, I mean, it took me like several years. I kind of gradually built up my privacy versus publicity and how much media I was taking on and how conservative I went. And even a year ago, I was still kind of a little bit, wary about like bigger media and stuff. Like I had to be convinced to do Fox News. And, at this point, I've just accepted it. Like I've changed a lot in my attitudes and even political tolerances and things. Um, but I guess we could talk about, I know we're just getting into the heavy stuff like right away, but
Oh, it's
um,
fine.
yeah, I know. So whatever. I talk about this like all day anyway. So DBT, I think it's great that you've been doing DBT. I found it useful, but it sounds like are you still doing DBT? Are you doing it regularly? And could you say, how you got into doing it and maybe a little bit about what it is and how it helps?
Sure. So I am currently a couple of months into a year-long outpatient DBT program, which for me is weekly sessions with a trained DBT therapist, as well as weekly skills group that's about 2 hours long, that we're
Okay.
going through the dialectical behavioral therapy curriculum that was created by Marsha Linehan, who is the founder of DBT, working through like the different skills modules. So every week we take like a different skill from a different area, to like address a different problem. So like emotional regulation, distress tolerance, mindfulness, or what's the fourth one? Oh, interpersonal relations or interpersonal effectiveness. And we're taking, maybe like 2 or 3 skills, and we're going through a lesson plan, practicing in the classroom, and then taking homework home to practice throughout the week. Um, and honestly, for me, that's been a game changer. No pharmaceutical changes, no major like lifestyle changes. DBT has probably been the one thing that has helped me get to the point that I'm at now and how I was introduced to it. So I have this really great um, track record of waiting until a problem gets so bad that I explode. But when I'm about to explode, I do get help. So
Yes.
I did this when I was 16. I essentially completely burnt myself out, drove myself to like borderline suicide, and was like, I'm unsafe. I need to get help. I'm putting myself in a mental hospital. So I did. So I didn't do anything I was close to, but I was like, okay, we're going to nip this in the bud. Same thing happened last November, where I didn't go inpatient, but I was like, I'm, really struggling because, of course, I just realized that I was LARPing as a man for the past 5 years, and that it was a lie, and that everything everybody told me was a lie about that. And that now I'm like this because of hormones and surgery and all of that jazz. So, rightfully so, I was suicidal. And so I sought help in an intensive outpatient program where I was introduced to DBT. And I did that from November to like early January. And I already noticed a really big difference when I was there. And then from there was kind of like a weird waiting period. And I struggled like February, March, but then like late March, I got put into the outpatient program. And
Okay,
then
so
from
you
there, it
were
was,
in the partial.
yeah, I was in partial hospitalization.
Yeah, I think um I applaud you on, following through and doing it that consistently, because it is, I mean, it's extremely rewarding, but it also can be really tough to get to like 2 appointments every week, at least for me. The skills group, which is a peer support group, and then the individual therapy. I think I only did that for like less than 6 months maybe, and probably not as consistently. So I agree. I think, you know, did you start off with the mindfulness module, or did you come into it at a different module?
So when I first was introduced so I did day hospital first when I was like in the intensive outpatient program way back in November. So I was there 7 hours a day, 5 days a week. And I was in like the regular track for a few weeks. And then they put me into the DBT track. So they have like an 8 week DBT course that meets like 3 half days a week. So I did that while I was there. And I think we started like every week with like mindfulness. So we split up mindfulness across the 8 weeks and we did like Mondays for mindfulness. And then I think the first like real module we started with after that was emotional regulation.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think the I think interpersonal effectiveness is probably the one that should come later, but the other three I feel like are pretty, like, you can't go wrong starting out with any of those three, like distress tolerance, emotion regulation, and mindfulness. Like, yeah, you're pretty much going to need those three things every day. Um so that makes sense. Yeah, so I mean, do you think that grief, like, would you describe it as grief? Because it does seem like you have come to quite a lot of radical acceptance, but you know in terms of acceptance, it's there isn't just one huge moment of acceptance and then you're like set. It's just every day you slowly accept the same thing over and over, and then new things come up that you then have to process and accept. So you can't really um quantify it exactly, but the in term I mean, and I know there's a lot of other things, if not those things are far more important, or more, that require more radical acceptance. But in terms of the grief from, sort of the, I almost want to call it like a betrayal of perception, a betrayal of reality, a betrayal from other people, that they lied to you about this illusion and fantasy of, transitioning and what that would do. And, you know, like, it's just a lot of betrayal, and as well as obviously the negligence and the malpractice side of it. I guess, what's your relationship to grief right now? How do you tend to process grief? You seem like the type that would probably intellectualize it a lot. Do
Yeah,
you cry a lot?
definitely.
Are you very passionately, or what, how do you think you respond as you process it?
So, previously, my response to grief was to either strictly intellectualize it or try and bottle it up and stow it away and kind of leave it as like a future Casey problem. Um, in my detransition, well, how I responded to emotions on testosterone was very different than how I responded just 1 to 2 months off of testosterone, even 3 to 4 months off of testosterone versus now 7 months off of testosterone because my hormones are regulated. Because there was a period of time. So like I stopped October 21st, 2022. November to December, January, I was kind of in grief. I was still dissociated. I was pretty numb. But then somewhere around January, February, like through like late March, early mid-April, it was just all over the place. I felt like I was crying every day, and I was angry, and I was so all over the place and so dysregulated. Um,
Do you think
which
that
is
was
ironic.
because of the estrogen, or?
Maybe it's interesting because I did have a full OBGYN workup in like late January and I had labs done and my testosterone levels were still high. But they were like kind of like PCOS high. They weren't
Okay.
like taking steroids high, but my estrogen was within normal female range,
Hmm.
which just a couple months off of T, they were kind of surprised that things came back online. I didn't have menses or anything, so that wasn't working at the time, but like I could feel my body trying. And, it just like for months I was, very dysregulated. Um, so I've noticed that like how I process my emotions and stuff. Like at one point, I was very stoic and dissociative, and I was like, this is just how it is, and you've just got to keep going and cope. And then very, very emotional, very in my feelings, crying every day, very mad at the world, at myself, at the people who I thought were supposed to protect me, whether that be my mom, the clinicians I worked with. People said that they were going to save my life because they were going to try and liberate the man soul that I apparently had in me because I wanted to be a Boy Scout. I wish I was making that up. That's in the notes. But I don't know what it was, but now I'm kind of like in this happy medium. I guess I've entered wise mind, or I'm more likely to enter wise mind instead of strictly logic or emotional mind. It's kind of that
Mm,
happy medium where it's like, okay, I felt my feelings. I've felt all of the emotions. I felt them strongly, and how I'm feeling is valid. I have a valid reason, a very factual reason to feel the way that I feel. um but is this going to keep serving me if I keep perseverating over this
yeah.
and rehashing this? And when I was like, no, and I have the ability to, kind of revisit those things when I'm in the right headspace. But I've reached a point where I try and not let them weigh me down. And I'm like, okay, what can I learn from this? How can I build resiliency based from this?
Do you think, I have a couple questions from that. Do you think that the dissociation has served you well for the most part over your life? Like in kind of in a way that, if like for me, I was never able to be stoic. And I was just a complete basket case, volatile emotions every day. And I just couldn't function at all. And so to someone like me who doesn't who hasn't experienced sort of that other way that trauma manifests in the kind of detachment range, do you think that that actually has been productive? Because now when you are in a more healthy range of emotion, you will default back to a more rational range versus someone like me. When I default back, it's still more volatile emotion.
So I also have experience being a very volatile and very, very emotional person like in high school. So I couldn't really find a happy medium. Either I was like melting down, flipping out, having a panic attack, or I was completely shut down and like,
Mm-hmm.
dissociating. But truth be told, my most academically productive times were when I was dissociated emotionally.
Yeah. I
So
mean,
that's where
you're
I
that's
defaulted
what I
to
was
because
guessing.
yeah, that's where I
But I
defaulted to.
that's I guess what I was getting at too is like, as a young child, I'm guessing that you were pretty dissociated. And then around middle school, high school, then you started to become very volatile. So you had do you think you've been more so in that extreme detachment? Like your brain is more wired for that overall?
Um, I certainly noticed that my brain is more wired towards like stoic thinking and like pragmaticism. I'm not sure. I saw somebody cluster those two together. But that's something that's come with time and maturity. I haven't always been that way, and I haven't forced it either. Trying to think. I did kind of dissociate as a kid, but I also still have a really good memory of a lot of my childhood. There's swaths I don't remember, but like there's a lot of things that I do remember. Um, but I was like emotionally out of control like 8 onwards. So like age 8 up,
Okay.
I was already like a wreck. Like it was bad. I was having panic attacks in public because I thought I saw somebody that looked like my dad, or if I saw Santa Claus because my dad had like a big beard and stuff, and we
Hmm.
weren't supposed to be around him, I would just like melt down. And my mom's like, "Great, Christmas is ruined now. That's
Oh.
fun."
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing with trauma is that it is a spectrum of response. Everyone has this proclivity to be anywhere on this spectrum, from hyper arousal to hippo arousal.
Hypo, yeah.
Yeah, hippo arousal. And we all have that proclivity. And even if you lean more towards one or the other, I definitely lean more towards the hyper. Um, you can still go, in and out through different phases. So I think that's an interesting thing to note, because I'm sure you think about how a lot of these forms of, you know maybe the brain does all these things for protection, for survival mechanisms. They are legitimate coping tools, very primitive ones that kind of end up not serving you in the long run, but in the short term, each of these behavioral responses do serve a useful function. So there's times when it is important that you get big and scary and loud and fight off a threat. There's other times when it's best just to be offline and just be like, there's nothing going on. I'm just going to continue my business. And then other times when you do want to like curl into a ball and hide. So all of these responses are are normal. But the other question I had was when you said in regards to the hormones that you could feel your body trying, what did you mean by that?
Um, so I trying to think here. Like I could occasionally feel like cramps and that kind of stuff. Like I felt it felt like my body was like trying to start up menses again or start up a cycle, but it
Hmm.
never really like came into fruition. For anybody that cares, it did come back eventually at about 6 month mark.
Okay,
Um,
that's useful,
so
I think, for people to consider.
yeah, which is interesting because again, I have PCOS and I was I had difficult irregular menses. Like I think I've only had 10-ish in my life. It was like 10 or less when I went to the hormone clinic.
Really,
And
10
then
or
like
fewer periods over your entire life?
and I was 17 when I
Wow.
started hormones. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
I started my periods late and they were very irregular. They were also very heavy when they came, but like I could go several months without a period. Um
Wow.
So I wasn't expecting it to come back super soon. And when I did go to the OBGYN, which by the way, any trans women or anybody that's just any woman in general, but specifically anybody with a history of taking testosterone, if you're currently taking testosterone, if you want to come off testosterone, whatever, please go to the OBGYN, please get an exam, please get a pap smear, please make sure that you're monitoring what's going on. Because luckily nothing happened, but my 5 years on T, I did not. Because of course it's men don't go to the OBGYN and it's gonna make me dysphoric. Luckily, I escaped unscathed in that department, but long and short, I bit the bullet. I was like, I don't want to do this, but I need to see if I've done any damage. And we saw that the uterine lining was thin on transvaginal ultrasound. It was thin, and there was nothing wrong with my ovaries. And they were like, you know what, we could induce periods now, or we can watch and wait and see a year from
Hmm.
now. If you
How do
haven't
they
had
have
a period,
induced periods?
I forget what the medication is called. I think not I think Depo-Provera is the brand name.
Hmm.
There's
Okay.
like a certain I think it might be a form of birth control that they give you like a 10-day course of that is supposed to like start a period, but I hear that it's heavy and very painful and not a fun time. And I got that prescription like in late January, but I was just not mentally ready for it. I was like, I'm not taking this. So I'm just gonna
Hmm.
wait. So we agreed we'd watch and wait, come back in a year. Um, and if, the uterine lining looks like it was thickening up and I hadn't had periods or whatever, then we would talk about options of kickstarting things um, from there. So, but like between like January and what was it, like early May or something, when I finally did have my period, there was like a couple of times where it felt like things were starting to try and come back online. Um, and I
That's
definitely
really
felt it
interesting.
emotionally. That was an emotional roller coaster for me as well.
Okay. And was that around the time that you what month did you delete your original account and then make a more subdued account?
I think it was late January. Yeah.
Okay. So like 2 months after.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Because
think
oh,
that was a
sorry.
wise move. And I know I told you at the time, I was like, don't worry about it. Like, you're not the first and you won't be the last. Like, just making an account, just like getting bombarded and then just being like, I'm done with this. Like, and then, yeah, it happens. But I guess that kind of translates into another topic that I was thinking about, the pros and cons of detransitioning publicly and privately. Like, I think it's pretty obvious what the negatives are, just a ton of harassment and, just gaslighting and just a million, really what it is, it's just a million strangers' opinions about intimate details of your life in your head, and you already don't know what's even going on. But in terms of the pros, do you think there's been pros to having your account blow up? Do you think it kind of forced you to consider thing like, as a wake up call, or um would you do you wish that do you think you would have still awakened to the extent that you have without it?
No, I would
Mm.
still be trans right now.
Mm.
Had I not gone on Twitter and done that, I would have stayed trans. In fact, I was working my way towards investigating referrals for bottom surgery leading up to that point.
Wow.
Like that's where I was at mentally, or at the very least, I was working on investigating hysterectomy because I was told by my hormone clinic that once I reached 5 years on T, that I
Mm.
needed to strongly consider getting a hysterectomy
Even though
prophylactically.
in your scans you said there was no atrophy, there was no necessarily a reason to get to have a hysterectomy performed.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. But also my insurance would have covered it because it was medically necessary.
Right.
That's a whole other thing.
Wow,
But
that's
yeah, had
fascinating.
yeah. Also interestingly enough, my insurance policy blatantly states that any post-op gender surgery reversals are not covered because they are not considered medically necessary.
Of course.
Yeah,
Um,
which yeah,
that's
that
that's
that's a whole
that's
thing.
so what do you think it was it like, I'm trying to think of the different factors. Like, was it the amount of people just being like, that was crazy that that happened to you, that was fucked up, or was it like a specific sentiment people were saying, or some kind of intrusive thoughts that just started to come up in you in your body?
So I think that the first thing that I remember after the video went viral for me, because I lived the past 5 years fully believing I was a man, not biologically, of course. I was with it enough to say I was biologically female, and I could communicate that like in healthcare environments where it mattered. Like, I'm biologically female, I transition, I'm a trans man. This is need to know information. But I didn't like believe that I was, a woman or female outside of that context. So I thought I was under the impression that I was like this manly man and I was very man looking and that I was, I could never pass as a woman ever again. And I thought I was like super duper passing because everybody around me told me that I looked like, just a random normal dude. And then all these people like literally pointing out, in spite of, my, androgenic alopecia and my voice, they were just like, well, here's like XYZ. Here are all of these signs that we can tell that you're trans or that you're biologically female. Like all of these people. Now, given you can't always tell. That's a joke in the communities, of course, that
What were the reasons that
everybody's
they gave?
um like eye shape, face shape, even when I was on T,
Hmm.
mannerisms, kind of just like the way that I moved, even though it was a little bit more subdued in that video, because of course I actually had hair longer than I did now, but the thinning was really getting to me. It looked a lot worse than this. Like this is a lot more filled in now, but it was still a lot worse. And it was like me trying to like grow it out for my one final hurrah before I just went completely bald. That was my attitude with it. But then it was so distressing and it was just reminding me of like, my fate, if you will, that I just like went to the barber shop and I got it buzzed. And then I went out to my car literally right after that appointment and
Oh
made
yeah,
that
that's
video.
right.
Um,
You just had a haircut. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I was under the impression that I was like irredeemably male looking. But then people were just giving me all of these like tiny little nuances, even with the hair loss, that was not the case. Or, okay, you're like a conglomeration of secondary sex characteristics, not, one or the other. But it was a wake up call that to me, I thought I was like super 100% passing, and maybe that wasn't the case.
Hmm.
And then also the TRAs, how the TRAs and like trans people like treated it and everything. And I think what actually spurred me to stop testosterone or to start thinking about things was seeing like certain trans influencers I literally grew up watching turn on me and just take like low shots. Like Ty Turner, Sam Collins, no offense, Calvin Guerra, they all like commented at some
Hmm.
point. Of course, some of the ones I didn't watch, but like, Aaron Reed, Alejandro Caraballo, some of those people. Alejandro Caraballo was not happy that his tweet made it into the Reuters article on detransition. And then was asked for comment about it. And he was
Wow.
just like, it was just taken out of context. And it's not my fault that, I thought this person was a grifter. Um, but honestly, seeing how the TRAs like en masse and how the community on social media responded to that video was enough for me to go like, am I even on the right side? Is this even something I should believe in? Does this have any factual basis? If the kind of like the front leaders of this movement, at least on Twitter and social media, are acting this insane, like where's the basis of it? And then I just started
Hmm.
questioning everything, and it felt like my reality fell apart, which is a really great realization to come to at the age of 21.
Yes, it is coming of age, and in a more spicy way. Um, that's really interesting that it's like the trans community fell on their own sword because they just outed themselves as being freaks, and without nuance and the inability to just show compassion or have dignity in their own right. I mean, so do you think it was their lack of compassion, or what was it about them specifically? Just the fact that they reacted so histrionically to something that you thought was just kind of you were kind of in your own world and your own perceptions, and then they kind of exposed the lies because they were so adamant about these black and whites.
I think it was part of that. I think it was them. One of the biggest things was that they assumed that I acted like I didn't know what testosterone was going to do. So like they all assumed that I didn't know, or I acted like I didn't know that testosterone was going to deepen my voice, or that was going to masculinize me. Like, yeah, I knew it was going to do that. I knew hair loss was a risk, but also literally ask any 16-year-old before they do anything. They could be like, yeah, I know the risk, but it's not going to happen to me.
Yeah, exactly.
So looking back at pictures, I have pictures. Those are not going to see the light of day because people say I looked unhealthy, like in the video from October. I looked horrible, horrible. At age 18, I was already starting to lose hair. I talked to my mom about this the other day. I was like, my hair was already starting to fall out, not even a year on testosterone. And she goes, yeah, but they told us that that's what we had to do. So I was like, okay, you might be bald, but at least you'll be alive.
Hmm.
Which kind of just seems like the attitude with transition in general. Like, hey, my health might go to shit, but at least I'm happy.
That's
Might have
like a
taken
George
10 years off my
Costanza
life, and
line.
yeah,
I'm bald, but at least I'm alive.
yeah. I literally, I got people in my replies that were like, I lost all my hair, but at least I'm a stud now. And I'm just like, I mean, if that's the trade off you want at 26, you do you. But like,
Hmm.
we shouldn't be selling this as a miracle cure. So like people like misconstruing what I was saying and kind of like running with that. But then I'm trying to think what the other thing was. Oh, the other thing that drove me up a wall, and they do this all the time, is they say, well, you're just cis. You're cis. You don't get to have an opinion. Like your lived experience doesn't count because you're actually just cisgender, cis scum. And it's like, I literally did what you did. And some of the people commenting, I did more medicalization than what you did. I lived it longer than what some of you did. So, like, what do you mean? Like, just because I'm not actively identifying with it anymore doesn't mean
But you
that I
were
don't
in
have
the
the
video.
experience.
You
Yeah,
were
I was.
identifying with it in the video, and that
I
was really the
was.
most absurd part. Is that you never said you weren't trans. You never said you didn't have dysphoria or that you were detransitioning.
Yeah, that was the other thing too. And that was confusing with like, some of the conservative media saying I was a detransitioner, but then like luckily there were some people that even like detransitioners that were like, hey, in case you didn't say that they were detransitioning yet, like that was not a thing that was indicated. And then, I ended up detransitioning, but um that was like there was just so much confusion, so many things being said. But yeah, the big ones were like misconstruing what I was saying and saying that I shouldn't have an opinion because I'm just cis now.
And this is like sometimes people will ask me, do you find the term detransitioner dehumanizing or limiting, or and the thing is like it's just it's describing a process. um I mean, it's a psychological deprogramming and a physiological um shifting process that you're still going through. It's like I've been detransitioning, or detransitioned. I mean, it's like it's hard to know like when there's been an end. I do feel like for me, I'm done because the physical, with all the physical stuff, I'm done. With the grief, I'm not done with that. I'm still mourning the loss of my organs every day. But in terms of the deprogramming, even that's still going on a little bit because I'm still getting triggered from gaslighting, but I'm aware of it to the point where I'm not getting emotionally dysregulated from it, but I am still, the red flags are coming up like, this was gaslighting, this was wrong. I believe this, lie, so I'm still psychologically deprogramming, even though for me it's been 4 years. And I think maybe that's what people need to understand, that, detransitioning is just, it's like transitioning in that it is a process and it is a step by step process. You're stepping with transition, you're stepping onto a conveyor belt of all these prescribed things of what you're supposed to do. And then with detransitioning, you're deprogramming and stepping off and being like, now what do I do? And there isn't a typical process except for the grief process and the healing, the universal healing process. Um, so I think the term cis is very like I get called that as well. And I mean, I don't I don't like the term. I think that, you know, it's normal, natural, and healthy to just be a woman or a man. And you don't need cis in front of it. But it's like, what is the difference? It's like, this is a spectrum. Like me and you, we're on a spectrum of the same thing, but we're in different places. We're in different places, like our appearances are different, in terms of femininity, masculinity, secondary sex changes that occurred, voice difference, but it's on a spectrum. It isn't just one against the other. In terms of like, when are you detrans, when are you cis? Like there's never an exact, you never reach it exactly. Um, and certainly for me, like when I was, you know, 6 months or a year or two into the detransitioning process, I didn't look like this. I still had short hair. I was still dressing in exactly the same as I was when I was trans. So it's like, it's fascinating how they try to use that as a gotcha, as in like, what I view it as is, when you're cis, it means that you're not enlightened about gender souls. And when you're trans or non-binary or a queer ally, then you're enlightened, then you know the gospel, and so cis is saying, you're not a believer, so you're not valid. And you're also stupid because you're not enlightened enough to, or they'll say, you know, you failed to be trans. You couldn't stick it out. You just couldn't handle it. To me, it's kind of almost like a drug addict saying like, oh, you couldn't do heroin every day, like, and still function, or you can be an alcoholic and still have a job or whatever. It's a major cope.
I mean, there's so many major copes that I see, like trans people, so many. Like there's one, like I jokingly post about tracking the Western trans genocide on Twitter, because I forget what it was. Like, people bring up that like we're in a trans genocide, and finally
Yeah.
one day, like several weeks ago, I saw somebody who was like, we're at stage 7 of genocide. And I'm like, this is so histrionic. So
What
it's
is
like,
stage
okay.
7?
I don't know. Apparently it was like, and the really shitty part was it was like some chart from like the Holocaust Museum talking about the stages of genocide. I think like the dehumanization stage. I don't know.
Have we
Unfortunately,
not
I'm
been
not.
there already before now? Like
Yeah,
in their words, like I think we've been there the whole time.
yeah. I don't know, but like I decided to track it, and my methodology was that because I am permanently medicalized, and I'm also not overtly making any attempts to like try and like really signal myself as like femininely female, I'm probably going to get assumed to be trans, versus like just male. So, if the trans genocide is coming, it's coming for me too. So I was like, I'm going to do some on the ground reporting. And I'm going to report on the Western trans genocide. And I would be like, I have yet to be like it is day 3 of the Western trans genocide, kind of like Dylan Mulvaney, but
Yeah,
and I have yet to be genocide. We'll continue to monitor. And somebody like some trans guy was in my replies, and he's like, but they're actually there is a genocide going on. They're trying to outlaw our existence. They're trying to take our medical care away. And then like most recently was just like because now there's like an LGBTQ state of emergency. That's it's like an
like
actual thing.
at a
But
federal level or
or
some.
I guess like it was an article published by the Human Rights Commission
Oh, okay.
on the 7th. So I'm now tracking that too. So I think we're like on day 50 something of the Western trans genocide since I've kept up with it.
Day
And day 3 of
50.
the like 54, I think today was.
Hmm. Well, when we get to 69, let's do something for it.
Yeah, no, we need to do something spicy for that. But and so I posted like I think yesterday, and like this person was like, you're trying to take away the one medical treatment that I've tried in my life that has actually helped me and saved my life. How could you? This is genocide. They're not rounding up in camps, but they're trying to, market us out of existence. And I'm like, that's a cope if I've ever heard one saying, well, this is the only thing I've tried that's helped. This is the only thing that can help me. This is the only treatment. Transition.
Mhm. Right, because the the if they view it as medicine to the same as getting opioids for chronic pain or some other type of medication. It's medicine to treat their condition, but the difference between this condition and all other conditions is that when you give someone a medication to treat a specific thing, you can actually see a healing effect, or there's a certain regulation that occurs that you can know that that's the appropriate treatment for a legitimate condition. But with gender, I don't even like to call it gender dysphoria, but with gender distress, there is no marker for it, and the only marker that they have for it is of it's not the best term, and they need to change gender euphoria to something else because that makes it they sound crazy.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, when I hear gender euphoria, I think gender boner at this point. That's just
mm,
me, though.
yeah, they're getting, I mean, we already know that there's a lot of autoerotic things going on, and I need to research more into autoandrophilia. But it's real. I'm curious, to learn more about it. But it is erotic. When you're doing changes to your genitals as an adult and changes to your secondary sex characteristics, there's some sexuality involved in that, or it's the removal of sexuality, but it's still in reference, to something erotic at some point. And so the euphoria, I mean, I view it very similarly to someone who's abusing substances, um, a placebo effect, well, they get a legitimate rush from it from the hormones, but then they get a placebo effect as they continue. And when you get the most dopamine when you are in pursuit of a goal. So you actually decrease in dopamine after you reach, you achieve what your intention was, but in the pursuit of it, that's when you are getting the most reward chemicals. And I think that's a lot to do with the transition process, and that's very unlike the detransition process, because I mean, I could use more dopamine and I could use more serotonin these days, because you're not really aiming towards a goal. You're just kind of almost like relinquishing tension, and you're relinquishing cognitive dissonance.
It's very true because, like, with transition, you are using medical technologies to augment your body in a somewhat a predictable manner. Of course, no one can fully predict, but like, no one is taking testosterone just to feel better. They're taking it to masculinize. Same thing with estrogen. They're taking it to feminize. Like, they're not taking it like antidepressants. They claim that it has that effect, and I mean, it might have that effect. I even think that testosterone is dopaminergic, meaning that it increases the uptake of dopamine naturally. But like people, any woman that is taking testosterone at the doses that we've taken them or that are prescribed for transition are taking them to masculinize, and they have a kind of general idea what that might look like. They have some general changes that they can expect. But with detransition, there really is no known end outcome. It's kind of just like relinquishing, like you said, relinquishing control. My body's just got to figure itself out, and it's going to happen on its own time. It's very anticlimactic.
Yes, it really is. It's just an unraveling of mess, and it's not as glamorous. Um, so I guess thinking about, I mean, you know how I just said like detransition isn't necessarily a step of goals. I actually think that obviously we need goals in life. That's a huge part. We need to have reward for creating meaning. So I feel like it's very important to discuss how we can create meaning through other goals, because it's not so much that detransition has goals. I mean, yeah, there's certain things that are wise to do, like getting our hormone levels checked or finding a support network or whatever that is, but we still need to have other goals and ambitions that we're working towards outside of the processing. So on that note, could you talk about what kind of your current passions are, what are your long-term goals, and then what are your short-term goals? I know you said you had, was it a 5-year plan or a 3-year plan?
Technically, it's a 5-year plan. So, like,
Okay.
I have a 2-year plan and a 5-year plan. Well, it's 4 to 5. It depends. It's based around my education. Also, small note before I get into that, I think a really big emphasis with detransition is that part of what got us into transition in the first place was obsessing over gender. And so when you're detransitioning, like in order to, try and access healing, I think it's really helpful, and it's made a big difference for me to stop obsessing over gender, including like the detransitioning of the gender. So like trying to find things outside of that has been also what I think helped flip that switch for me recently, because I was like, okay, I have an educational plan. I'm going to try and get a job. I'm going to try and like get back to life. That when you stop obsessing over gender, life tends to actually be pretty good. So what are those things? Passions, I'm still kind of figuring that out. Previously, I was a pretty big classical music nerd. I played trumpet for like 8 years, and I liked listening to classical music. I liked doing brass arrangements, but then I went to college for a year and just completely burnt out of it. Um, so I listen to some music now, on and off, predominantly heavy metal, which is quite the juxtaposition from classical music, like Bach's My Man to screamo heavy metal gent.
Yeah, I was
Um,
gonna say, what artists?
so I really like I'm trying to get back into like some of like the classics like Metallica, some of their older albums, and uh Megadeth and like 80s, 90s heavy metal. I also really like Deftones, Slipknot, um, newer bands, Spirit Box, Ginger, Architects, a little bit of everything.
Do you like Judas Priest?
I do. I haven't listened to too much, but yeah, I do like Judas Priest.
I was just, I needed to listen to some Judas Priest yesterday, like, and I was thinking like this is like my favorite band in middle school, and I'm like, it's no wonder that I've gotten so much into existential philosophy, because this, like, it's very existential what they're talking about, good and evil, like in all these songs. But yes, that's, I think that's a really good outlet. And are you exercising still these days?
I'm getting back into it. I'm focusing more on cardiovascular health. So, when I was like probably, I say peak transition. So I had a period of time where like I kind of looked like a late teens guy a little bit. Like I probably looked like I was like a 16 or 17-year-old kid. But I was like really lifting. I was lifting 5 to 6 days a week. I was doing powerlifting. I was working like 30 hours a week. I was going to school. Everything was great. Peak health and fitness, able to deadlift over 400 pounds. It was really great. And then I was in nursing school and I got really sick, and like everything kind of just went to shit. And then like I became pre hypertensive, and it was like a whole mess. And then I had to drop out, and all of that. So I'm not doing powerlifting stuff because also I would like accidentally blow out a capillary in my left nostril. Like if I
Hmm.
lifted too hard, which kept happening too much. And I was also start beginning to damage my joints. Like I was constantly in pain just from lifting, like with
Hmm.
even with good form, but just like lifting weights that were my skeleton was just not equipped for.
Hmm.
So I'm starting to do some calisthenics, do some core strengthening stuff, focus on cardiovascular health. And I am no longer pre-hypertensive. My blood pressure is actually really good. I'm tracking heart rate, tracking all of that stuff, weight, sodium, nutrients, and all of that. I'm not exactly sure if that counts as a hobby or a passion, but well, I guess health is my passion because like in May, I came off of all my meds. I'm officially
Hmm.
medication free,
Hmm.
which for
Yes.
me is a huge deal. Huge deal. Not even a medication for GERD or acid reflux. I've been able to manage it on my own. So I'm like slowly researching stuff like that and like, which nutrients can you get from food, which ones do you supplement, and all of that stuff. And slowly getting into calisthenics, other passions, trying to get back into reading. I used to read all the time as a kid, but now it's just like difficult. And then I guess the passion that's coming up that I mean it's what I'm going to school for, but I am passionate about it as well as nursing. I am going back to nursing school. Because
Yeah,
I
I was
just
gonna ask about that because I feel like you've been juggling a lot of different potential paths, like biology, or is that part of the nursing program too?
No, well, I mean, you have to take anatomy and physiology, which are bio courses, and like a microbiology course, but I've already taken all of those. Yeah, I was thinking biology at some point because my health was still not super great earlier this year, and I wanted to do something in the sciences. And I was like, okay, if I get my bachelor's in biology and then I go on to grad school, maybe I could do genetic research. Because for some reason, I guess you could say one of my special interests in high school was genetics because I managed to write like all of my papers somehow I would tie into like genetics. So even like for my AP government class, I wrote like my
Hmm,
thesis paper on like laws regarding human genetic research in the
that's
United States. And my
interesting.
teacher was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. You got an A because you confused me the entire time. And I'm like, thank you, sir. I will take the easy 100%. Um, so I was thinking about that, but then I was also looking at grad school and just like hearing from people and like all of the red tape and the bureaucracy and just the unknowns of getting a job. And I was like, my health was starting to get better. And I was like, how does this help people? Not directly helping people. That's really important to me is I want to be able to help people and see that I'm having an impact. And finally, I kind of just circled back and I was like, if I could get physically healthy enough, maybe I could pull nursing school again. And after I made that decision to you know re-enroll and pursue that, um I've noticed a pretty significant difference mentally, and it's something I'm passionate about. Like patient education, making sure that the patient actually understands what the doctor is telling them,
Mm-hmm.
and why they should care. Like, hey, maybe you should care about high blood pressure because if you let it go on for a long time, your kidneys could fail and you could go into kidney failure and you might have to go on dialysis and get a kidney transplant. Most people don't hear that when they go to the doctor's office and they hear about high blood pressure. They just go,
Right.
whatever, I'll watch it, I'll take a pill.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you're primarily focused on the geriatric nursing.
So for nursing school, we have to learn everything, but I do have a soft spot for my geriatric folks. I don't know why. I'm just really good at working with older people, specifically dementia patients. I've worked in a
Mm.
long-term care facility before as a patient care assistant. And just even like when I did clinicals before, I just really gel well with dementia patients. I'm able to de-escalate them if they have any issues. I'm able to connect and communicate with them. I don't know how or why. It's just like a natural ability that I
Yeah, I
have.
was gonna say, why do you think that is? Do you think it's your patient, or I feel like you need to have a
Um,
lot of patience. I don't think I'd be able to have the patience.
yeah, definitely. Working in geriatrics is you have to have a lot of patience, and I've seen that there's like three different kinds of people. Gross oversimplification. There's three different kinds of people. There are the people that are really patient, really good. They can they work with geriatrics well. like they can handle it and they're willing to take their time. There's people that are really impatient, they're go go go, and they just get fed up and like it's just not a good fit for them. And then there's kind of people in the middle that are like, they're patient enough and they can do a good enough job, but they're not really like strongly in one camp or the other. um, and I've worked with, people that like geriatrics. I've also worked with people that absolutely despise geriatrics, and surprise, surprise, more negative patient outcomes for the people that kind of hate their job and don't like working with old people, um, including like actually interacting with the patient and, being able to communicate and actually, give them care that they can understand without, getting hit. Because sometimes dementia patients get violent.
Mm-hmm.
Which is just because they're confused. It's not that like Mima is not attacking you because she hates you. She is flailing her arms because she doesn't know where she is and she thinks it's 1990 and she's not in her house. That's what's happening, but people don't understand that.
Do you
Um,
think is there a shortage of, this is a whole other discussion, but is there a shortage of nursing for the elderly?
there's a shortage everywhere, but
Mm.
especially in long-term care. So you can work with the elderly, like in a hospital. I was really privileged to, and I'll keep this short so we can keep on with the other parts of the conversation. But I was really privileged to be able to network with a geriatric nurse specialist with one of the hospitals I was doing clinicals at. So she was a nurse with graduate training specifically in geriatrics, so worked with any like elderly patients that came like into the inpatient environment in a hospital, of how to manage, dementia and Alzheimer's like during an acute stay. But then there's also the long-term care environment, so like nursing home, assisted living, personal care, um, where you're dealing with people for months, years on end, and managing the day-to-day of that, but in a less intense medical environment. There's a shortage everywhere. There's a
Yeah.
shortage on both sides.
Hmm. That makes me kind of think, how, I'm detransitioners in general, we all get so many comments like, you're going to use your experiences to save others. You should all be therapists and work with teens with gender dysphoria. And, I feel like, I get it. The spirit of what they're saying is good, but I feel like, we all have our own ways that we're going to utilize the wisdom and hypervigilance from these experiences to help other people. I think that the way that, obviously I think you can go through there's one thing I want to say is like, just I'm a couple years older, and from what I've experienced, every little passion that you have will come back up later on at the right time. And it'll be very synchronous. And so, maybe biology and genetics isn't at play right now. I guarantee it'll come back. And um, I just think that's cool. That's not a deep thought. I just think I like the synchronicity of that. I guess what I'm saying though is the path that you're headed in is one where you're going to be able to utilize your caution around medical ethics and safeguarding and patient care and communication, patient relations in a much different context than the one you were in, but it's the same need for quality medical professionals. And I think I'd like people to just in general think more about that there's many ways to help. There's many ways to, again, I don't want to use the term saving people, but there's many ways to, you know, give back to the community. I like to think mine is maybe more psychoeducational. Like I'm more interested in lecturing, being a professor, or even like helping people heal, not from direct therapy, but from, witnessing something beautiful, like a piece of art that's just something that reminds them of a positive, time, or something that helps them heal or process something. you know, it's kind of annoying that people keep saying, you should be a therapist or you should be a politician or whatever these people say. I'm sure you feel the same way.
Yeah, but honestly, it's nothing that I haven't heard since probably high school. Um, I know that this is something that I think you probably wanted to mention at some point. So the trials and tribulations and benefits of being a gifted kid. So being
Yes, I
designated
did want to get
as
into that.
gifted. Oh my goodness. Because I had that designation, everybody, like all of my teachers in high school were like, oh, you're smart. You could go be a doctor. You should be a lawyer. You should do all of these like super smart things. And of course, I completely made everybody wig out when I told them I was going to be a music major, especially because one of my good friends, Sam, who was the year ahead of me, he was the valedictorian of the class. Literally every single honor society, 4.0 GPA, had everything going for him. He went for music and they flipped because they were like, you could literally go on and cure cancer and you're choosing to go play the viola. Like, really? Um, and now I think he's wrapping up his master's in musicology. He does like musicology research, which is really cool. And he's using his brain. And, I'm happy for him. But, anyways, like, since high school, everybody's been telling me be a doctor, be a lawyer, go be a scientist, go be a researcher, go do engineering, go be an accountant, go do something that smart people do. And literally, like, I had a phone call with somebody recently who was a lawyer. I wasn't seeking legal counsel, but they were just like, oh, like, what are you doing for school, because you need to be a lawyer? I was in my intensive outpatient program and my psychiatrist told me I should go be a psychiatrist. My therapist told me I should be a therapist. This
Yeah,
follows me everywhere I go, where people are just
same,
like, oh, you should do X, Y, and
same.
Z, and I'm just like, I no, no.
I mean, it's like I think it would be better if, I mean, first of all, it's just common sense. Like you can't force someone to do something they don't like for very long. And if you're brilliant, but you don't care about what you're doing, you're not going to do an effective job. Someone who maybe isn't as intelligent, but they're really passionate about what they do and they're curious and they're willing to put in maybe they need to work a little harder, but they put that in, is going to be more effective in whatever role. And I do think it is harmful when, you get, I mean, someone saying like you need to cure cancer, or what we get told, in this very niche context, that the same thing, you need to save children's lives.
Oh yeah, you need to go on and save the children. Or oh, my favorite is they need to hire you. You need to go to high schools. You need to go to schools and you need to present to the kids.
Yeah,
Like, what school is gonna have us?
I know. I mean, but this is why I think it's kind of ironic for me, because, or why it works for me in a way, because I happen to be a detransitioner. I also happen to enjoy lecturing, enjoy teaching in that way. I'd be happy to go into high schools. That doesn't mean that that's appropriate to say to me. That's not appropriate to say to a lot of other people who especially are more fresh in their healing experiences. It's like every just context is so underrated. Like, it's one thing to say to someone like you, like, wow, I bet you're going to be really good at medical ethics given your experiences and your actual relevant interest and plans in your personal life that you have autonomy over. Or for someone to say to me like, your writing is really gonna, inform people. It's like that's actually based in, like, I'm so hyper aware of when I'm being misunderstood. And that comes from childhood gaslighting, and so even when people are being well intentioned but they're still misrepresenting me, that bothers, it annoys me so deeply. So I'm just like, just I'm fine with talking about really intense shit, but just make it authentic to my experience if you're going to talk to me about it. Otherwise, you just seem like, I don't know, it's hard to explain. I guess it just feels like they don't understand, and that they're invalidating my experiences, you know.
Or from my experience, like, like specifically with detransition, they see like detransition, they see like one or two keywords, and their mind fills in the blank with whatever template they have.
Yeah, exactly.
um and they don't listen to the details, they don't listen to the nuance. One of my favorite ones is when they assume that people who have transitioned as adults, even if that designation is that they were like 18, 19, but they were legally adults, that they automatically assume that they transitioned as minors.
Mm-hmm,
Like, my
mm-hmm.
favorite one was like somebody said that like Richie transitioned as a minor.
Yeah, it's so true. Like, I mean, I get it. Like, they hear, a couple notes of a song and then they're automatically assuming what the chorus is going to be. And it's just not the case. Like it's going to be a weird fusion song. It's going to have a lot of time changes. I keep putting on and off my glasses because I don't know why the lights are so weird today. Um, so there's a lot of other topics that I want to get into that I feel like we won't have time for. But I'm glad that we talked about just kind of debriefing a bit about your current space after making that update video, because it really is such a time capsule. It's definitely not a bookend, isn't it's the end. It's just a moment, it's just one, another chapter. Um, but this is very important. I did want to ask, since this is Funky Psyche, do you consider yourself funky? And if so, in what ways do you feel you're funky? How do you express your funkiness?
Um, so when I hear funk, of course, you've imprinted on me. When I hear funk, the first thing I think of is funk god. So thank you. You've hijacked my definition of funk now. Whenever I heard funk, I used to think of either wacky print or like funk music, but now I think of funk god. So, that's the definition in my brain. Um, I think I'm definitely a little bit eccentric compared to the average person in some respects, but I don't know. The thing is, you even gave me notice for this question, and I still don't have like a definite answer.
Yeah.
So I've had time to think about this. I don't have an excuse for not having an answer, but I don't know. I definitely think I'm different. Well, yeah, no shit, Sherlock. I'm different. It's pretty obvious I'm different. Um, but am I funky? I don't know. What quantifies funk? What is your definition of funk?
I mean, I think there's a lot of different layers to it, but when I think of funkiness, like in terms of the music and in terms of the culture around, that sort of stereotype, it's really about authenticity. It's just about the raw grooves, the offbeat, notes, the offbeat syncopation of how you live your life on your own terms. You're doing your own grooves, and yet it aligns with higher values. So to me, you're very funky in that way because you're authentic, you are on your own beat, but you do it very well. You have a charismatic energy. And I think if I had to critique, I'd say maybe a few more prints, a few more patterns, a few something on the wall,
Yeah, yeah.
just
I
something
I
on the
was gonna say
wall.
that the wall is a point of contention for not just you. Many people have commented on the wall. They're like, you could have a backdrop, really. You could put something up because it's not like you could do better. You could just do better.
Because it's like a asylum, it's like mental hospital vibes and holes. And it's like, I'll be honest with you, like, even you don't have to have anything intense, but just having like it's the feng shui of it. Like the feng shui in here is very curated because I need it deeply. But it's like if you just put up the energy that you want to receive. For example, I put up like right in front of my workspace. I thought, like, what do I want right here that I'm going to have to be looking at all the time? I put up this psychedelic, colorful watercolor tapestry of trees, and it's like looking up as if it's like trees that like their shadows at sunset, and it looks like something I've seen on acid many times. But it's like this is like it's all coming together and it's unifying way. I'm like, this is the energy, the creative energy that I want, versus what I put in my bedroom was a kind of calming purple tapestry of like moons and stars, because I want to be a little more chill in there. So like, I don't know, it's good to just have intention. I know Jordan Peterson wrote a whole chapter about this in one of his books. But it's like, you don't have to figure it out according to anyone else's terms or even anytime soon, but just thinking about what you put there, that's the energy that you're going to receive. So it can be helpful, because otherwise you're just receiving the void. So if you can tolerate that, then you're a very strong person to tolerate just the white void.
Well, actually, I was talking to somebody about this today, and I've mentioned it before. And you had some funny comments about it, but like honestly, after I'm done with college and I move out, like I would totally be fine living in a van, like living very minimalistically, like living in a van, not vlog life, not becoming a narcissistic vlogger, just like living in a van, super minimalist, very like few possessions because I thrive on simplicity of my
Mm,
surroundings. The less chaotic my surroundings, the quieter my mind in a good way.
hmm.
It's
Yeah.
less distracting for me. Um,
Mm.
but at the same time, like I also like really appreciate the curated background and the curated environment that you have. I would have no idea where to begin in doing that with myself, but I should probably get some sort of backdrop
Well,
of
when you
some
say
sort.
about the van thing, it makes me feel like, I mean, in a way, it's simple, I suppose, like in terms of having few possessions, but in terms of the aesthetics, that to me would feel extremely complicated. Like looking out the window, I don't know. I've never lived in a van. I can't say authentically, but like, I guess when I think of it, and then I think about the white walls, it almost makes me feel like you don't need the walls. You don't need anything on the walls. What you really need is to experience the sky itself and the natural landscape, like that's the level of, I don't know what I'm saying exactly.
No, no, I understand. And maybe that's why. Well, it's not that I don't have anything on my walls. I do have one decoration. It is a chicken calendar. So I have a calendar and it's called Glamour Chickens. And this is the second year of having it in a row. It's like fancy chickens posing for each month.
Okay, then
Um,
that is extremely funky. Okay,
yeah.
that's the energy that you want to give and receive.
Yeah. And at one point my name on Twitter was Casey Chicken Master Miller. Because
Yeah.
I joked about how we're all gonna have our roles in the apocalypse, and I'm gonna be the master of chickens, chicken master.
Mm.
Because I love chickens. I just love chickens.
What do you
It's
think
they're
of Colonel
just
Sanders?
I don't have like a super strong opinion
I
on
don't,
him.
I'm just thinking like if you're the chicken master, like then Colonel Sanders, like that's like competition.
Yeah, true. Well, I wouldn't be like in the game of making the best chicken sandwich, but though also coincidentally I have worked at Chick-fil-A previously,
Mm.
so
Okay, so maybe we can do another round because there was several more questions that obviously are extremely deep. I know the AI that's very deep and pertinent. But this is the one that I'm going to ask of kind of all the guests that come on along with the funk question. What do you want the public to know about you that is misunderstood or something that you haven't spoken about before?
hmm. Again, you gave me forewarning and I kind of thought about it, but it's such a deep question. Um, okay. What is misunderstood or not known about me
That
that I would
you
like the public
intuitively
to?
just, that you'd wish, was associated, like when people think of you, obviously they think of many different things, some obvious specific things. What if they could think about you in a certain way, something to be associated with you that isn't associated? What would you most want?
Um, I think this is a little bit less applicable now because of the video that I posted, but I hope that something that is associated with me and my story is evolution and change and hope, resilience. Because again, how I came onto the scene was being ruined and too far gone. Literally, my words, I called myself too far gone. And how I was kind of this sob story of like, I was the thing that you show your kids to tell them that this is what happens when you take testosterone for 5 years. Again, quoting myself, I said all of these things. And that's how I felt. And that's what the world saw. And that's kind of what the world has thought of me if they've ever heard my name pop up over the past several
Mm,
months. But one thing that keeps people in fixed mindsets, or a fatalistic mindset, or just a non-productive mindset, is thinking that they're too far gone and that they can't pull it back. And I want to give people hope. And I hope that eventually over time, my story is associated with hope and resilience and being able
Mm,
to move past these things, not downplaying the severity of medical transition and the impact that it can have physiologically, psychologically, socially, etc., but also that we are very resilient and strong individuals, and that this is something that can be moved past.
mm-hmm. Well, I feel the same way, and I feel like that's definitely that's the energy that your tweets, maybe not 100% of them. The
Yeah,
Twitter
yeah,
circle is a different story. It's not public.
yeah.
But jokes aside, I do think that that's the energy that you're bringing, and you're bringing a humility to say, this, this was a wrong, these were wrong things that happened, wrong choices. I also am making what right choices or better choices, and I do think that resilience will be associated with your story.
And again, I mean, it's not because I want people to, think I'm a great person, or, I'm doing it for like moral kicks or whatever. It's to give people hope that we're in my shoes, that it is possible to move past this.
Mm-hmm.
And for
And
people
hope
to
to
see,
yourself.
yeah, hope to myself, because I also was like, oh, I haven't changed. Like, I've changed a little bit, but I haven't changed that much in the past 7 months. And then people are like, are you kidding me? Like, you've changed a lot.
Yeah. Yes.
Um, so, which for me again was like, oh, that's nice to hear, because again, I live at home with my mom, and she's like, you haven't changed at all. You still look like a dude. And I'm like,
Mm,
I'm not even sure I can trust you anymore.
right.
Like, just based on perception and so on. But like, even seeing, like, there was a couple of people like that were just like, it's so nice to see people like me saying these things and moving forward with their lives and healing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
Exactly.
kind of my mission, if you will. I don't have like an agenda per se, but kind of, you know being representation for detransitioners specifically that were in my shoes, and in your shoes at one point, is kind of like why I'm
Mm-hmm.
back in a very low key way.
Yeah, I think it's so important to have, you really do need other people to help, kind of remind you of all the progress you're doing. I think that for me, that's one of the been one of the most helpful things. Obviously being in therapy, that therapist role can help you, recognize what you're actually doing well, but also just friends and other people saying, I've seen you grow so much in the last year, because they're not in your head, but you're not, struggling to, have a positive view of yourself, or, whatever. They just, my friend says, they're mirroring your energy back to you. And if people are treating you very well, and they're in reminding you, you can't fully believe anything of what people say, because people do project, but in general, it's very useful to have other people assure you, like, yeah, no, this is, I've definitely observed this, and here's the evidence. And then you're like, oh yeah, like, fine, like, I'll think well of myself in this moment.
You just perfectly described how I feel like receiving any compliment or like positive affirmation, because I've always fought it. I've always been like, well, no, you're wrong, and here's why. But then when people like present near empirical evidence, I'm like, fine, guess I'll have to be positive
Yeah,
because I can't
I
deny it.
struggle with that. So I'm, people in certain topics, like, I do notice just in how I respond to other people, like on autopilot almost. It, for certain subjects, it will default automatically to no, like, no, that's nope, I'm doomed. But for most other subjects, it's like, yeah, thank you. I have noticed this, and I've been working on it, and I feel good about it. And I being mindful of that energy, that's proof to yourself that you are evolving into your higher self, which I call funk god for me. I'm always in a permanent state of trying to be funk god. It's, spiritually, like, and I'm not always there. But it's always good to have an ideal to kind of strive towards, I think. That isn't body modification.
That is true. This is because it's hard because when I talk about like returning to your true self and being who you are, then I think like, oh, this is what gender journey people say. But like but I'm not body modding anymore. This is actually like wholesome. This is actually returning to yourself and like being true and authentic to who you've always been.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree. Well, I would love to talk again. Definitely get more into the spiritual stuff. There's so much more to get into. And I'm sure there'll be more updates and different chapters evolving. But for now, thank you, Casey, for speaking with me. And until next time, stay funky, everybody. And as always, don't forget to boogie. So I will now